My name is Josh McKelvin. Thank you very much for joining us. Got to ask you to take your seats because we're going live in about 2 minutes. So please take your seats. On behalf of the President's Office, Dr. Wayne Lesperance, the Board of Trustees, faculty, administration, student body, thank you very much for being here for the 2nd Congressional District Democratic Primary Debate. Again, I'm Josh McKelvin. I'll be your moderator. Our panelists sit right there, and hopefully they haven't gone home. They'll be coming out shortly. Not yet. We got to get our panelists out there so we have people asking you questions. Come on, guys. We got Kevin Landrigan, the union leader, Melanie Plenda from Granite News Collaborative, and Jeff Chittister. Late to the party. There he is. So you know the rules. If you've been to a debate, try to hold your applause. No flash photography. Just don't be generally disruptive in any other way. I appreciate that. We're going to get started in just about. We're going to get started. All right, welcome to New England College, the Putnam Theater, and for joining us for the Live Free or Die Democratic Primary Debate for the 2nd Congressional District. Our candidates: Maggie Goodlander, born and raised in Nashua. After graduating from law school and serving as a law clerk on the U.S. Supreme Court, Maggie returned to New Hampshire to teach constitutional law at UNH and Dartmouth. She was a senior advisor for President Biden's Unity Agenda. Maggie is also married and continues to reside in Nashua. Please welcome Maggie Goodlander. Our next candidate is Colin Van Ostrin. He's experienced in the world of business, including time at Workforce Solutions at SNHU and business management, Stonyfield Yogurt, just to name a few. In public service, he also served 2 terms on New Hampshire's executive counselor. He holds degrees from Dartmouth and George Washington University. Colin lives in Concord, right? Yeah, Concord, with his wife, Kristen, and they have 2 children. I meant to check with you beforehand, so come on out. Colin Van Ostrin. We did flip a coin to determine who would go first with opening statements, and so we're going to start with Colin Van Ostrin.
Thank you.
You got it. Take 60 seconds, sir.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Peter and Patrick. I love you guys. I'm proud of you. Thanks for coming. I moved to New Hampshire when I was 22 years old. It was the 18th house I ever moved into. And this is the first home that I've ever known. And everything you guessed with 18 moving is probably right. I know what it's like to live without health insurance. I know what it's like to be crushed by student debt. And this is the first home that I've ever known, the only home. I met my wife, Kristen, here, put down roots. I've had the chance to serve on our executive council and in the private sector. Ran to get Planned Parenthood funding restored in our state, and we did, even though it took twice. Voted on a 3-2 vote to expand Medicaid in our state. 100,000 of our fellow citizens, our friends and neighbors today, have gotten cheaper, better health care as a result. Yes, but I only have 60 seconds. This is a really important election. And with Congresswoman Custer retiring, I know how important it is that we hire a New Hampshire leader who's in it for us. And if that's important to you, I hope to be your choice.
Ms. Goodlander, feel free to take a couple extra seconds. Your opening statement, please.
Well, it's great to be with all of you tonight. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Maggie Goodlander, born and raised right here in the 2nd District. And throughout my life, I've brought New Hampshire values to the front lines of the fights that I think are on the ballot on September 10th and November 5th. I've served 11 years as an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve. I teach constitutional law, and I helped enforce our Constitution as counsel in the first impeachment of former President, now convicted felon Donald Trump. After President Biden was elected, I went to the Justice Department, where I was on the front lines of the fights to restore reproductive freedom and to take on the corporate monopolies that are jacking up costs and making life harder for hardworking people all across the Granite State. I went then to the White House, where I brought New Hampshire values to the fights I hear about every day on the campaign trail, including our mental health crisis here in New Hampshire and across the country. I love this state, and growing up here, you learn how to grill a candidate before you learn how to grill a hot dog, so I'm excited to be grilled tonight, because it's a hard job and unprecedented.
I get it. Hot dog grilling sounds good. All right, let's let the grilling begin. Our panelists, I already introduced you to you, so let's start with Jeff Chittister from WFEA's Morning Update. Jeff?
And this first question starts with Colin. As we prepared for this debate, latest reports confirm 4 students were shot and killed, 9 injured at Appalachia High School in Georgia. The firearms discussion stirs immense emotion, especially at times like these. Where do you stand on firearms, and what policies would you support if elected, and how would you approach the conversation for all involved?
It's another horrible tragedy. It should stir immense emotion. 10 months ago in Concord, we had an active shooting. My 13-year-old was walking home a few blocks away as it happened. I hope other parents don't have the experience that we had where you get text chains and group texts pop up from friends and friends' parents. Who can get Peter? Who can get Sam? Where's Graham? It's unfortunately an experience way too many parents have. And kids, way too many have been experiencing active shooter drills themselves. So here's my position on this, and let me be clear. Gun violence is the #1 cause of death of our young people and our teenagers in the United States of America. And I can tell you as a gun owner myself, there's nothing inconsistent with the Second Amendment, the second word of which is the word well-regulated. There's nothing inconsistent with that, with the need for universal background checks, red flag laws, and other basic gun violence prevention laws. And I believe with more parents who've had these experiences and more kids who have serving in the United States Congress, we'll find the bipartisan consensus we need to get this done.
Thank you. Same question for you, Ms. Goodlander.
Gun violence is the #1 killer for our kids in this country, and women in America are at a much higher risk of dying by gun violence than our neighbors to the north in Canada. Look, in Congress, it's time for Congress to step up and pass bipartisan gun safety legislation. We made some progress during the last 3.5 years, but there are still loopholes to close. There are still weapons of war that are in our communities. I know from my time in the Navy that weapons of war have no place in our communities. They're putting our kids at risk. What I'd also say is 2 more things. We gotta invest in some of the root causes of gun violence in this country, and that goes directly to our mental health crisis. We need more funding and more programs to address the problems at their root causes. And we also need to take on the gun industry, which for too long has benefited from loopholes and a lack of rigorous accountability. And that's exactly the kind of spirit that I want to bring to the United States Congress.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question coming from Melanie Plenda from Granite State News Collaborative, focusing on an important issue here in New Hampshire, and that's housing.
Okay, thank you. The Democratic presidential nominee has proposed a housing plan focusing on creating new regulations and adding subsidies, including providing first-time home buyers with $25,000 to help with the down payment on a new home. This will have a direct impact on New Hampshire's housing market. What role do you believe Congress has as it pertains to housing, and would you support a program such as the one being touted by the Democratic nominee? Why or why not?
Ms. Goodlander, starting with you.
You know, I would. Look, this housing is an issue I hear about every single day, everywhere I go on the campaign trail. We've got a crisis in affordability when it comes to housing, and housing is the cornerstone of the American dream, having a home. Whether you're trying to rent a home and rents are up, skyrocketing all across the state, the cost of buying a home is up 82% increase in the last 6 years to buy a single-family home. We know that we've got to increase supply. We've got to build 60,000 new homes in this state by 2030. And Congress has a big role to play in that, in bringing the federal funding that's going to be needed to do exactly that. But what I'd also say is we're seeing all across the state and this country business practices that are directly leading to high price in housing. So when you take a single family home, you've got a single mom with 2 kids up against a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm, and we're seeing this practice all across America. Private equity firms buying up single-family homes and jacking up the cost of buying a home in the state and across our country. Congress can do something about it, and I want to bring that fight to Congress.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Next question comes from Kevin Landrigan of the New Hampshire Union Leader. Oh, I'm sorry, Colin. Mr. Van Osteren. Respond to the housing question first.
No worries. It's a great proposal. It's similar to a proposal I first heard from Tim McNamara, the mayor of Lebanon, New Hampshire, someone who's worked on boards of a number of affordable housing communities in that in that area. It's one of a number of things that we need to do. The housing squeeze is probably the number one issue I hear about in every single corner of this state. We also need to repeal the Trump tax cuts for the very wealthiest, very biggest corporations and use that money for a few things. One, things like a first-time homebuyer tax credit, but also start paying down our deficits, getting them under control, push interest rates down so everyone getting a new mortgage or a new car or expanding a small business is going to be paying less. We also need to advocate for using some of those dollars for getting into our towns for water and sewer so new home construction is less. Now, every single mayor, every Democratic mayor in this district has endorsed me in this race, and over 60 of our local state legislators. And the reason is they know how important it is to have someone who understands our communities, who can be their advocate in Washington to get things like this done and help out specific projects in our towns and cities.
Thank you, sir. And just for the record, I skipped over a Republican candidate in the debate right before this, so trying to be fair. Yeah, all right, moving forward. First in the nation.
Which one?
Fair enough. New Hampshire's first in the nation. We know that. Kind of tricky business for a lot of Democratic candidates these days. Kevin Landrigan, your leader, has the next question.
Ms. Goodlander, I wonder if you could point to specifically when and how you raised any public protest to President Biden's refusal to file for president in New Hampshire and the Democratic National Committee's move to strip the state of the first presidential primary.
Look, no one does democracy better than we do here in New Hampshire. We are the state that made the nation in the sense that we're the United States to ratify the Constitution. We brought the United States Constitution into being. And growing up here with the First in the Nation primary, it's the ultimate responsibility of any citizen. You know, the right to vote is the right from which all of our rights flow. And the state of New Hampshire has been a model in how democracy can be done. And I'm seeing it firsthand every single day on the campaign trail. Like I said, you learn how to grill a candidate before you learn how to grill a hot dog. And I get the best questions here, and it's because we are a state that knows how to do democracy. We know how to ask the right questions of our leaders because, look, this is a job interview. It's an interview for this job is a really hard one. The job of President of the United States is probably the hardest job in the world. And the people of New Hampshire know how to run a job interview the right way, and because no one does democracy better than we do.
Was your former boss wrong by keeping his name off the ballot?
Well, I think, we should restore the First in the Nation primary. I'm focused on what we're going to do moving forward, and I want to be a part of making sure New Hampshire's got the First in the Nation primary moving forward.
It's still there. All right.
Josh, let me give you a clear answer. Yes, he was. And one of the central things you have to do when you represent New Hampshire is put New Hampshire first, ahead of a national political party. That's what I did last fall when I raised my voice and said it was wrong for him to not be here and said it was wrong for the DNC to do what they did. I always think it's more important to stand up for the people of New Hampshire than for politics. But Kevin, to answer your specific question, I think I've been in the same room as President Joe Biden once in the last 5 years. He's an extraordinary leader, and I think his selfless decision this summer is one that's going to go down in the history books as an extraordinarily selfless decision for our whole country. But when I had that chance, when I was in a room with him in March of this year, I stood up in a room like this and respectfully told him that it was important to those of us here in New Hampshire that our democracy be respected and that our delegates be seated. And they were.
Stick with this topic, Jeff Tedester. Next question. Please, hold the applause. Thank you.
Ms. Goodlander, for you first. Annie Kuster and Chris Pappas voted twice in favor of the For the People Act that would federalize the election in New Hampshire. Secretary of State David Scanlon said that this one-size-fit-all approach would be wrong for New Hampshire and could lead to more voter fraud. Would you support it?
I think we've got a lot of work to do to protect the right, and I believe this deeply, that the right to vote is the right from which all of our rights flow. And there's a lot of work that the United States Congress needs to be doing to protect the right to vote. When you read the Constitution, and I hope you all do, because it's a document that's written for all of us, and it only takes 30 minutes. So if you're doom scrolling, turn to your document. And what you'll see is that so much of it has to do with the right to vote. And Congress plays a central role at this. I think part of the reason why we've got to win this seat and keep it blue is that we've got a voting rights agenda that's got to be put into motion right out of the gate. Everything from redistricting reform. We've got our own Project 2030 that we've got to be focused on. We talk a lot about Project 2025, but we're going to be drawing new maps, and that's the basis for how we ensure free and fair elections in this country and ensure that people's votes are actually able to be cast and counted. And it goes beyond that. I think it should be much easier to vote in this country, and Congress can do a lot to make that happen.
Same question for you, Mr. Van Oostrum. Would you support the For the People Act despite the warnings from the Secretary of State?
I do support it, and I respectfully disagree with his position. I actually think it sets some minimum standards nationally. It wouldn't federalize our elections. Under that law, we would still have our extraordinary nonpartisan election officials in every town that are going to do great work next Tuesday, do the work that they do. New Hampshire sets the gold standard for elections nationally on things like paper ballots, something that other states are still learning how important they are. But the truth is there have been times in our state when we have gone wrong on this path, when we have done things like make it harder for college students who live here to vote here, or make it harder for people to register to vote here. And I think that it's important there be some national minimum standards to ensure that we expand access to voting, that we ensure fair and accurate participation in our democracy, and that's what that law would have done.
All right, thanks very much. Moving forward, our next question comes from AARP New Hampshire, focused on Social Security. Social Security Trust Fund expected to see a shortfall in 10 years. If Congress doesn't act, millions of Americans who are counting on Social Security will see cuts to the money that they've earned. Do you see, Mr. Van Oostrum, a path for Congress to work on a bipartisan solution to protect Social Security and those who've earned it? How do we go about it?
I do. It's incredibly important. My family is one of tens of millions in this country who've had family members who rely on Social Security month to month. Tens of millions of Americans have been lifted out of poverty or prevented from getting into poverty because of Social Security, and we have to protect and expand it. Some elements of that can be bipartisan. Probably of the three things I think will matter the most, at least one of them is quite bipartisan, which is having a strong and prosperous and growing American economy. When our economy grows, it helps strengthen our Social Security Trust Fund. The second thing might be hard to do on a bipartisan basis, but I'm not going to give up on it. That's to repeal some of those Trump tax cuts for the very wealthiest, very biggest corporations and get back to fiscal responsibility, get back towards balanced budgets that we've lost our way on a little bit in this country. And the third is right now, if you earn $165,000 a year or $165 million a year, you pay about the same Social Security tax in dollars, not as a percentage. There are ways we can fix that to strengthen the trust fund.
Same question for you, ma'am. How do we keep our promise?
It is a promise. Social Security is sometimes referred to as an entitlement. It is not. It is a cornerstone American promise. And hardworking people have been paying into Social Security for their lives. And listen, Congress has got to protect Social Security, and I want to be a part of that right out of the gate. There are a lot of questions of public policy that don't have clear and easy solutions. This one does actually have a clear and easy solution, and it's pretty simple. The wealthy should pay their fair share into Social Security so that we can ensure its solvency into the future. I'd also add that when we read Project 2025, to come back to Project 2025 for a moment, I hear about it every day on the campaign trail. What is so crystal clear is that Social Security is on the chopping block, alongside so many other important programs for our state and for this country. So that is why the stakes could not be higher this November.
All right. Thank you very much to both of you for the answers there. Next question is coming from our student reporter from the New Englander, our campus newspaper here at New England College. And I'm going to get this right, I promise. Jason Fredua Ogman will be asking the next question. Stand up, please, and we'll start with Ms. Goodlander.
Climate change is impacting New Hampshire industries that rely on outdoor recreation. What is the best, most realistic green energy solution of our state? How would you use your influence in Congress to help New Hampshire decrease its dependence on existing energy sources?
Well, thanks for that question, Jason, and thanks for being here tonight. The transition to the clean energy economy, I'm glad we're talking about it because it's one of the most important issues of our time. For more than a decade now, the Department of Defense has said that the climate crisis is a crisis of national security for this country. And I want to bring the energy to this issue that's going to make the state of New Hampshire and the United States of America the clean energy superpower of the world. There's a lot that we can do to reduce the cost of energy. We've got some of the highest energy costs in the state of New Hampshire. When I hear from people all across this district who are feeling pain by high prices, nothing is more clearly in focus than the cost of energy. And at the same time, big oil companies are making record profits. So Congress can do a lot about this. Number one, we've got to continue to invest in the sources of our strength, in resilience, in the clean energy future that the state of New Hampshire has got to be at the center of. And we've got to make sure that we are holding the culprits of the climate crisis accountable, because this is not a crisis without a clear culprit. And Congress can do a lot to make that happen, and I want to be a part of that.
Take a couple extra seconds on the same question, Mr. Van Oster.
Thank you for asking it, and thanks for joining us as part of this. It's great. When I was on the Executive Council, I represented 49 cities and towns for 2 terms in New Hampshire, including Henniker and including the Ashwaylet River. The Ashwaylet River had 400-year flood stages in the decade before I represented that area of the state. The reality is, and this is the first of 3 points I'll make, the reality is we can't prevent climate change from happening. We're already in the early stages. We need to stop, mitigate, and reverse it. So the first point is build more resilient communities. The next culvert we build has to be for the next 50 years, not the last 50. The second point is we have to transition to cleaner sources of energy, like you're asking about. Things like solar and wind are inherently intermittent. So we need to invest in a smarter grid, less regulations that protect the big utility companies and instead protect consumers and keep prices down. And we need to invest in better energy storage systems. And the last piece is probably the least sexy, but it's really important. Better weatherization really matters. It's the single most impactful dollar we spend is on energy efficiency. I learned that in the private sector, and I've seen how it can make a difference in the public sector too.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Next question coming from Kevin Landrigan, shifting gears now to foreign policy. Kevin? Let's start with Mr. Van Oster.
Great. Given the amount of military and economic aid that the U.S. is providing Israel in its conflict with Hamas, do you believe the Biden administration is being aggressive enough to mediate and help bring about a ceasefire?
I don't think we can ever say that we're being aggressive enough to bring peace. We always have to do more. The terrorist attacks that happened on October 7th of last year were horrific. And it's hard for us to even imagine that in this country. In a nation 30 times smaller than us, 1,200 people killed, hundreds taken hostage, 6 of whom were executed this past weekend after being held in captivity for almost a year. We have to acknowledge Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel has a right to exist. They are an important ally of the United States of America, and there's nothing inconsistent with those statements with also saying that the humanitarian crisis that's happening is untenable. 1 million people facing famine, 1 million people displaced, tens of thousands of civilians killed. We have to use every diplomatic tool to help bring that to an end. I believe the long-term solution has to be a 2-state solution. That's the way that we can finally get out of the cycle of violence to ensure democratic self-governance for all of the people of Israel and Palestine. That's how we will finally prevent the next generation from turning to the terrorism that we've seen in the past, in the recent past and in the present.
Thank you. Ms. Goodlander, take a couple extra seconds to provide your answer on this. Same question.
You know, I think part of the way that the United States of America can be more aggressive in bringing about a ceasefire is what we've got to see is the role of Congress restored in American foreign policy. I know from my own experience 15 years ago, working as a staffer in the United States Senate, when we used to have a bipartisan, bicameral supermajority in Congress, where really, truly, partisanship stopped at the water's edge when it came to American foreign policy. I've seen the power of what can happen when Congress has a seat at the table and is playing a role. And when it comes to the situation in Israel and in Gaza, you know, what we need to see happen is an immediate ceasefire that has 2 things occurring at once. It's the return of the hostages that have been kept in brutal captivity by Hamas since October 7th, the deadliest attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. At the same time, we need a surge in humanitarian assistance because what we see every day are people in Gaza who are suffering, who are on the verge, 2 million people without food, clean water. The United States of America has always played a role in helping the most vulnerable among us, and that is very true in Gaza today.
Thank you very much. Next question comes from Melanie Plenda from the Collaborative. Let's go to Ms. Goodlander.
Ms. Goodlander, what do you believe is the greatest threat facing our national security, and what policies specifically would you support to address it?
Well, let me talk about two, if I can, in 60 seconds. You know, the future of our global order depends on the role that the United States can play in writing the rules of the road and in taking on our biggest competitor and in many ways our biggest adversary, China. And let me give you one example. You know, here in New Hampshire, overdose deaths often begin with chemical companies in Beijing. And the United States Congress, what I've seen when I mentioned the bipartisan bicameral supermajority, one of the tools at Congress's disposal is to actually hold accountable foreign governments using the tools of sanctions. And I saw this early in my career. I helped write a landmark sanctions law taking on another twin challenge for the United States, and that is Russia. What I saw is that the tool of sanctions can actually impose accountability and bring about positive change. We need to see this stepped up in a big way when it comes to the People's Republic of China, specifically in cracking down on the sources of the number one killer for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45, and those are synthetic opioids. And this crisis often starts right in Beijing.
Same question for you, sir.
The central thread that connects our geopolitical strategy for this country has to be standing up for democracy. And it's four central theaters that it's threatened right now. We've talked about in the Middle East. We also see that threat with our economic competition with China. We see it in Europe with Russian aggression into Ukraine and our need to support that country. And we see it here at home with foreign interference in our own elections. In Ukraine, earlier this year, before this campaign ever started, I lifted my voice up with a Republican friend, someone who served in the Trump administration, to make it clear that bipartisan support was necessary for Ukraine. A few weeks ago, this gentleman who lives right here in Henniker, he and I welcomed the delegation from the Ukrainian parliament here as they were trying to help build more support for defending their homeland. I have seen in our own community of Concord, refugees who have walked to school next to me and one of my sons at our local public elementary school. And I have seen folks that we've worked with overseas in past jobs flee from Kyiv to Egypt, to London, and to take up arms to defend their homeland. We have to be steadfast in our support for the people of Ukraine.
Next question now coming from Jeff Chittister from Morning Update, WFEA.
This is a direct question to you, Mr. Van Oosteren, first. You served as the president and chief operating officer at the Manchester-based Alumni Ventures. In 2022, federal and state regulators investigated the company, finding it lied to customers and improperly moved millions between accounts. Among other things your company was sanctioned for, allegedly moving around investment fund money, effectively giving yourself an interest-free loan, as well as Alumni Ventures agreeing to pay back more than $4.7 million to investors, taken in the alleged misleading fee schedule. What have you learned from this incident, and what would you say to Democratic voters who are concerned that Alumni Ventures is under your leadership participated in many of the misdeeds that they despise in other companies?
I've learned to ask good questions in job interviews. Most of this happened, these issues came up 3+ years before I ever joined the company. I wasn't involved in any of them except helping them clean it up years after the fact. But the reason this is an issue in this race is because my opponent in this race, in this primary, has brought millions of dollars of out-of-state money, including super PAC ads, on issues like exactly this. The first television attack ads ever aired against a fellow Democrat in a Democratic primary in New Hampshire are TV attack ads on Maggie Goodlander's behalf. Word for word, almost, the question that you're asking, written on her campaign website, soliciting out-of-state super PACs to launch an attack against a fellow Democrat. The truth is, out-of-state forces are trying to buy an election here in New Hampshire. She has brought $4 million into this campaign for her own campaign and from these super PACs. 95% of that is from people who can't even vote in this district. They don't care about us. They care about power and influence, and they bring that sort of negativity and that sort of mudslinging into a state that can do better without it.
Certainly a rebuttal is appropriate, Ms. Goodlander. If you'd like to take 30 seconds.
You know, I got into this race because I wanted to be focused on the issues, and my opponent has attacked my commitment to the issue that brought me into this race, and that's reproductive freedom. He knows my record. He knows that the day Roe v. Wade was overturned, I was at the Justice Department helping to fight back. He knows that I was a law clerk to Justice Stephen Breyer, who wrote the dissenting opinion the day that Roe v. Wade was overturned. And because of his attacks, which he has made under his own name using his own campaign funds, Governor John Lynch has said that he is running the most dishonest campaign he's seen in 50 years. And you know what, Colin? You worked for an anti-choice congressman, but you don't see me sitting here questioning your commitment to reproductive freedom. And how dare you question mine?
Well, do you mind if I
30 seconds.
respond?
30 seconds, please.
The voters of New Hampshire know where I've been on these issues. I ran for executive council to get Planned Parenthood funding restored, and we did. I was named NARAL's champion for choice here in the state of New Hampshire by NARAL Pro-Choice New Hampshire. While I was doing that work, Maggie was in Washington, D.C., giving thousands of dollars to pro-life Republicans, people who were on the ballot with Donald Trump in 2020, and spending years of her life working for members of Congress on the other side of the aisle, not with this other side, but on the other side of the aisle, who are fighting to undermine some of our most basic rights, including things like access to health care under the Affordable
We got to wrap this up. Please, very briefly, and then we got to move on.
Look, this is a job interview, and you should take a close look at what each of us has been up to in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, I've been serving our country in the United States Navy Reserve as an intelligence officer. I've been teaching constitutional law here. I helped impeach Donald Trump. I went to the Justice Department, where I was on the front lines of the fight for reproductive freedom and against the corporate monopolies that are jacking up costs. I then went to the White House, and during this same period of time, my opponent was working at a venture capital firm, helping the rich to get richer. We've made different choices in our lives, and those choices have a real bearing on how we will be as members of Congress, and it's had a bearing on how we've been as candidates too.
Ma'am, thank you very much.
you mind if I respond?
We got to move forward. Jeff Shadester's got the next question.
This is for you, Ms. Goodlander. Recently, The Hill ran a story on your most recent financial filings, describing it with a headline, "Ex-Biden official in New Hampshire primary raises questions with bizarre financial disclosure." Quoted in there was a legal center spokesperson, Daniel Copto. "To be perfectly honest, this was pretty bizarre. Can you explain these discrepancies to Democratic voters and steps you have taken to correct this issue?"
I've been fighting for transparency and accountability in government my whole life. I believe in these values deeply, and like every candidate for Congress, I filed the financial disclosures, our team did, on time and as required, and in fact, we've gone back and supplemented with additional information. All of this is now a matter of public record, as it is with every candidate, and I've got nothing to hide, and I encourage everyone to take a look, because to me, transparency and accountability are the most important values you can bring to government.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to move forward now. AARP, again, has another question they've conveyed. We're going to start with you, Ms. Goodlander. 48 million Americans help their loved ones each day to remain independent and in their homes and stay in our communities. These family caregivers obviously sacrifice a lot of time and money and provide, according to AARP, $600 billion annually in unpaid support. Does the federal government have a role in helping out these caregivers?
Absolutely. You know, just this morning in Concord, I had an incredible roundtable with a group from AARP, and each person I heard from shared a different dimension of the problem that we have in the crisis of caregiving in this state. New Hampshire is the second oldest state in the country, and we have got to build out the workforce of people who can help care for the elderly among us. This is a big priority, and there's a lot that Congress can do. In addition to helping to build out the pipeline of providers, there's plenty of red tape to go around. You know, what I hear about from people every day on the campaign trail are the hurdles that they face in trying to, on behalf of a loved one, sometimes in the most vulnerable and consequential moments of their life, access the care that they need. You know, even just the experience of being held on hold with an insurance company when you're trying to advocate on behalf of a loved one, Congress can do something about this. And we've seen really good progress on a bipartisan basis in coming up with these proposals, but we got to bring them across the finish line, and that's what I want to do in the People's House.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Same question for you, Mr. Van Hoos.
The care economy is central to all of our lives, at every stage of our life, child care, elder care. A lot of the issue comes down to lack of available workforce in our state. There's a lot of work more that we need to do and a lot of work that we've done. I'm proud of my work to expand Medicaid in this state, 100,000 of our fellow citizens getting cheaper, better health care, including addiction treatment services and behavioral and mental health care. We could have done more. We should have included the public option in the Affordable Care Act, something that was stripped away. would have been a big improvement. But there's more that we can do right now on the care economy. I've been working on a public-private partnership in southern New Hampshire on the Biofabrication Coalition. It's important work helping build a new industry about a promising research coming out of Dean Kamen's research labs. And we just secured a $44 million grant for the state of New Hampshire. One of the biggest pieces is to expand access to childcare and help boost the childcare workforce in our state. The care economy touches all of our lives, and we need to focus more on ensuring there's the right people with the right skills and the right support in order to care for all of us.
All right, thank you, candidates, and thank you once again to AARP New Hampshire for sponsoring tonight's debates. All right, moving forward, we're going to go to Melanie Plenda with a question about something you guys touched on earlier. Melanie?
So currently, our immigration systems have been described as broken, and many Americans are concerned about what the influx of illegal immigrants may have on our job market, housing shortages, and national security. What policies are you prepared to support to address immigration?
Mr. Van Oosteren.
So I think about this in two parts. One is in border security, and the other is in comprehensive immigration reform. There's much more we can do on border security, and we were at the cusp of doing it when Donald Trump killed this for purely political reasons this past spring. There was a border security bill that had secured bipartisan support in the U.S. Senate, was on the cusp of passing. And look, it wasn't perfect, but it would have meant that someone who right now comes over the southern border, asks for asylum, and waits 6 years for a hearing, that would be cut dramatically, maybe down to as little as weeks. That would have been good for everybody. Also important is comprehensive immigration reform. I've had 3 times where I've lost a valued member of a team that I was leading at a great company here in New Hampshire. And when that happens, often because of government typos on their visa renewal applications, it hurts everyone. We need access to high-quality workforce in New Hampshire. It's going to take comprehensive immigration reform to do it. And we need to make sure people who've spent their entire lives here, who've paid their taxes, who've played by the rules, have a way out of the shadows as well.
Same question for you, Ms. Goodlander. Do you on the same page as Ms. Van Oosteren, or you want to dig a little deeper?
You know, when my great-grandfather came to this country over 100 years ago, and he came to Nashua, he was able to come through Ellis Island and build a life here, pursue the American dream, because we had immigration laws that could meet the moment. We had a system that could survive 100 years ago. What we see today is an overburdened system and outdated laws. And that's why early in my career, I went to the United States Senate and helped to craft a landmark, bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform and border security bill. And I did that working on a bipartisan basis, including for a Republican, who my opponent has criticized me for working for. His name is John McCain, and he helped lead this effort, as he had alongside Senator Ted Kennedy, this time with Senator Chuck Schumer. We created a framework for the future, a framework for immigration reform that is the basis of the bill that President Biden and Vice President Harris are eager to see signed into law. And there's one reason that it hasn't been signed into law, and that is because Donald Trump has concluded, as he often does, that when something is not in his personal political interest, he's going to stand in the way of the American people and immigration reform. This is wrong, and we've got to have people who are ready to come in on day one and bring about comprehensive immigration reform.
I'd like to respond. I have criticized that work, and I think it's important that voters understand the context. For years of her life, my opponent has worked in Washington, D.C. for Republicans and ex-Democrats who are working against the very Democratic Party agenda that's important to so many of us. When I was fighting to get Planned Parenthood funding restored, she was working for a Republican U.S. senator who wanted to defund it. Before that, she worked for years for a senator who was attacking the Affordable Care Act, trying to strip the public option out
I'm not sure how you're responding to immigration reform, but...
Well, I'm responding to what she said about her work and the context of why I had brought it up in this race. Here's why. We need people who fight for our basic values, not who deprioritize them over and over again in Washington, D.C.
Obviously, you have an opportunity to respond.
Thank you. My opponent is talking about two things. The one Republican who I worked for, and again, his name was John McCain. He saved the Affordable Care Act. I worked with him to take on Vladimir Putin in a landmark sanctions bill, and because of that work, I'm banned from Russia for life on a bipartisan basis. I helped craft a comprehensive bipartisan immigration reform and border security bill. I am proud of that work, and Colin, I don't think you would disagree with any of the work that I did. And again, You worked for an anti-choice congressman, and I am not questioning your commitment to progressive values. You're talking about two contributions I made. One was to a Republican who voted to impeach Donald Trump. I thought it was a good thing for our country, and I still think it's a good thing that we have Republicans in this country who are going to take on Donald Trump because he poses the greatest threat to our country than any other human in perhaps American history. The second contribution was to a friend of mine, a good friend of mine who was a law school classmate and a fellow veteran who was running against one of the most extreme people to ever serve in the People's House, Madison Cawthorn.
Here's what people have to...
I have a question. Actually, to move the ball forward.
I just want to address...
Please, make it quick.
Here's what's important for people to understand. The reason we lost Roe, I've been fighting this fight for decades. The reason we lost Roe is because of excuses like these. People giving money to Republicans, working for Republicans who are undermining our most basic health care, deprioritizing the issue and focusing on other things instead when we needed people like her here in New Hampshire fighting for basic...
We got to move forward, but take 30 seconds, Ms. Goodlander.
We lost Roe v. Wade because Donald Trump packed the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court reversed that longstanding decision. I was proud to work as a law clerk to Justice Stephen Breyer, who dissented the day that decision was overturned. And the day that decision was overturned, I think we all remember where we were. I was at the Justice Department helping to fight back, helping to make sure that women in this country get access to the health care they need, and that doctors in this country can provide that care without fear of prosecution. Too many women are denied access to health care in this country. And I know from my own experience, last year when I was 20 weeks pregnant and struggled to access the care that I needed, ultimately got it. But here's the thing. New Hampshire is not immune. Today, Planned Parenthood is defunded in this state. We are the only state in New England without any legal protections for abortion access. A 15-day abortion ban was introduced earlier this year. This is not America. I'm in this race to fight to restore reproductive freedom.
You know, Donald Trump says that it's a state's issue when it comes to abortion. Since we're on the topic, fundamentally, why are you opposed to that philosophy? We'll start with you, Mr. Van Oosteren. Why isn't the state, does it not have the ability to govern itself?
Well, I believe it's time for a national law to protect the full range of reproductive rights. Birth control, IVF, abortion access, no matter where we live. That's what I'm fighting for in this race. And the truth is these intimate decisions always need to be between patients and their medical providers. And they're personal, these debates that we're talking about, they're personal for all of us. Maggie's running an ad right now saying, for this guy, it's about politics. The discussion we just had about the Affordable Care Act, about strengthening it, about making sure we have basic access to health care, that's personal to me. I know what it's like to live without health insurance. I know what it's like to be an accident or a sickness away from feeling like you're going to lose everything. When someone like Joe Lieberman strips the public option out of the Affordable Care Act, when people are helping him do that work, when he's attacking President Obama over this critical issue, and when people spend thousands of dollars helping Republicans who are undermining our most basic values as Democrats, it's personal to me and it's personal to all of us.
All right, same question to you, Ms. Goodlander. Fundamentally, why are you opposed to the notion that states have the ability to govern themselves on this issue?
Look, I know from my own experience that when you put a judge or a politician in between a woman and her healthcare provider in making some of the most consequential and difficult decisions that a person can ever make, it is a recipe for disaster. It is a recipe for death. And that is what we are seeing across this country. Women who are being denied access to the healthcare that they need. Doctors who are being held back from providing life-saving care because of fear of prosecution. This is wrong. This is the chaos that the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade has brought upon this country. And Congress, the fight to restore reproductive freedom starts in Congress. And that is why I'm running for the seat. I'm running for the seat because we need people who understand how to get the job done. Because it's a fight that starts in Congress but doesn't end there. All you need to do is read Project 2025 to see in such clear terms exactly how the whole federal executive branch could be weaponized against women in America trying to access the health care they need. That's why I'm in this fight.
All right, we're just about out of time, but we do have one question on term limits. Mr. Van Oosteren, do I have your attention?
Yes. Oh, I thought it was coming from here.
No, actually, we're going to get to closing statements in just a moment, but we asked the Republicans who'd like to ask you, do you
Yes.
think that term limits in Congress are appropriate at this point? A lot of people think people are in Washington way too long.
I do. I
Yeah.
support term limits.
That's simple. Would you advocate for it?
I would, absolutely.
Same question for you, Ms. Goodlander.
Absolutely. I think term limits are good government. It's why we've got term limits for the United States president, and I think we should have term limits for Congress and for the Supreme Court, too.
All right. Kevin Landrigan, you get the final question. We are out of time. I'm sorry, Kevin.
That's all right. That's okay.
So
Not the first time.
you can each have 90 seconds, a little bit more than that, to make your closing statement. Again, we flipped a coin, and who won? Go ahead, Mr. Van Oostrum.
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you to our panelists. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I know how important it is for our district that we elect a New Hampshire leader who's in it for us. That's who I've been for the last 20, 25 years of my life. Working in our private sector, representing 49 cities and towns, volunteering in our nonprofits, coaching our kids' basketball teams. This is a life in New Hampshire. I'm proud of that work, and I know it's easy to take for granted what we have had with Annie Custer or the rest of our congressional delegation. But they know our communities like the back of their hand. They know our lives like they're written in their heart. And I don't think we can afford to lose that. And I don't think we can afford to let millions and millions of dollars of out-of-state money in this race take it away from us either. I'm proud to have Annie Custer's endorsement in this race, but I'm also proud that every single Democratic mayor in this district has endorsed me as well. Dozens and dozens of state legislators, every labor union that has weighed in the race. And the reason that matters is that being a good representative is about building a team, building a grassroots campaign, and representing all of us. I know in my own life how important it is to have leaders who do that well. I've taken the stories of people that I've sat with as their executive counselor, people struggling with addiction, people struggling with homelessness, and I've used that to get things like Medicaid expansion done with an extraordinary amount of work from an extraordinary number of other leaders. Because of that work, our lives are better. 100,000 people in our state with cheaper, better health care. I know it seems like Washington's broken, and I know it seems like it can't get anything done. But I've seen how people can be effective there, and it starts with knowing who you're fighting for. I'm doing this for the people of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you. You have the final word, Maggie Goodlander. Take 90 seconds, please.
Well, thank you so much for having us tonight, and thank you all for being here tonight. You know, look, this is a job interview for a really hard job in a completely unprecedented moment in our nation's history. This is perhaps the most important election in human history that we have coming up on November 5th, and the election on Tuesday, September 10th, sets the scene for that. I'm in this race because I love this state. This is the state that made me who I am today, and I have dedicated my life to fighting on behalf of the values that I learned growing up here and on the front lines of the fights that matter most to New Hampshire. The fights for democracy, and I've done that as a professor of constitutional law, teaching the next generation of Granite Staters, helping to enforce our Constitution. With an incredible team, we impeached former President Trump for the first time, and it wasn't the last time. Day 3 on this job is January 6th. And there is no time for a learning curve. I'm in this race because I believe, and I know I wouldn't be in this race if I didn't believe, that I could deliver for this district right out of the gate at an incredibly difficult time in our country's history. Look, the fights for democracy, the fights for fairness. I've been on the front lines of the fight against corporate monopolies that are jacking up costs, that are screwing over family farmers, that are making healthcare unaffordable for hardworking people all across the state. I want to bring that fight to Congress because I believe we can show that democracy can deliver for the people of New Hampshire. I'm the only candidate in this race who hasn't taken a penny from a corporate PAC, and I am proud of that. I'm in this race because we're here in the Live Free or Die state, and freedom is on the ballot, and I will fight with everything I've got for as long as I possibly can to restore reproductive freedom and to deliver the kind of democracy that the people of this state deserve. So thank you for having me tonight, and see you on the trail, I hope.
Thank you very much to Colin Van Oostrum and Maggie Goodlander for participating tonight. Thank you for putting yourself out there in the public arena. I know it's not easy. And that's a wrap on tonight's back-to-back-to-back debates at New England College. That's how we do it here. Thank you for joining us.